Redditors who have had neighbors from heck. What happened? A lady moved in and lied that her dog was a service dog because these apartments did not allow dogs or cats but can't deny a service animal. This dog was no service dog. It didn't even have basic obedience training and she would turn it loose all day long in the communal gated courtyard. Never cleaned up after it and it was annoying as frick because it would, playfully, chase everyone and harass everyone because it was starved for attention. She got tons of complaints, but because she kept claiming it was a service animal, there was nothing to be done. She eventually got evicted after getting a second dog she let run feral and crap everywhere too, which she never cleaned. Because obviously no one has two service animals that are literally never inside with the person. The landlord found out when she left she was also one of those hoarder people and left her apartment packed full of all kinds of crap and filth, including bags of clothes she had been stealing at night from those charity donation bins they set up in parking lots. She was just a vile individual. In this apartment my uncles lived in was connected to the neighbors by the bathroom, so they shared the bathroom. The neighbor lady was crazy and some mornings they would wake up and she would be in their apartment doing some creepy, weird crap. One morning they recall they woke up and she was standing over them, over their bed, watching them sleep. That was the breaking point. They got the heck out. We lived in what seemed to be a mansion type of house, rented out to 3 different families. My family lived on the bottom floor, and a family of 6 lived above us. A mother, father, and 4 daughters aging from 4 to 13. Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. After they were ready, more often than not they would refuse to actually go out the door to go to school, screeching as loud as they can until the parents decided to let them stay home. Since we were on the bottom floor of the place, we had free reign of the backyard, whereas the other 2 families barely bothered to use it. They would frequently dump garbage and other random stuff off of a balcony into the yard and never bother cleaning it up, which we'd have to tend to daily since we had 2 dogs and an outdoor cat at the time. It was all a nightmare. When they were eventually kicked out by the landlord, she asked my mother to clean out the room's floor they were living in. She told me there was over 100 2-liter soda bottles scattered throughout their place, as well as mold growing in multiple rooms with foul odors everywhere. Though the oldest daughter was the same age as me and I had a huge crush on her, she was a very polite and clean girl, which is saying a lot considering what her family was like. We talked with her family about letting her move in with us while the rest of them left. I feel like it would have been better for everyone if she had stayed with us, but it never happened. I really hope she doesn't live with her disgusting family anymore. I truly felt horrible for her. Every morning they would stomp around the house like little elephants and make as much noise as possible to wake each other up so they could prepare for school. To be fair, it's just a house, so they were probably just living as normal people would. Converted houses don't have the nice noise dampening structures that most apartments would have between floors. Had this dude next door. Our bedrooms shared the same wall. He had this subwoofer that was louder than the horn of Hammerhand. Guy would listen to strictly heavy beats. I hope he's in a ditch somewhere, naked with no other earthly possessions except for that subwoofer. Back when I was a little kid, my next door neighbors did hard drugs and were always loud and had women over. One day they got raided by the SWAT, and as it turns out the squad leader was my hockey teammate's dad. He chuckled when he saw me through the window and chatted with my dad for a few. Was pretty cool to watch and see their guns and suits. 10/10 will remember for the rest of my life. My house got raided. Not exactly a raid, but they did barge in with guns drawn, but once my dad woke up and they realized everything was fine, they just left by police when I was about 6 and I slept through the whole thing somehow. I have super religious neighbors. They hang signs for the local church camp on their property act. They kept putting our garbage cans in our driveway. While it was stupid and annoying, it became more and more aggressive. They would trespass on my property and do damage to my house. But I could never catch them in the act. So I did the only thing a sane person would do. I put on my velvet ritual cloak and made a show of putting a salt circle around my property, chanting and carrying on. Never bothered me again. We have a beautiful pit bull boxer mix that was stolen out of our backyard by our neighbors and given to a shelter for pit bulls. We looked for our dog for weeks, all day and night. Just as we were about to give up, My mom checked local adoption ads and found our dog. The shelter she was given to was literally a block away from our house, and they informed us of the people who brought her there, who turned out to be our neighbors. So we got our dog back, and the neighbors continued to try to get our dog taken away from us by calling the police for animal abuse multiple times, even when we were playing with her in our own backyard and very obviously loved her. My first apartment was a real dump in a seedy complex, and I had two people who I'd consider neighbors from heck. The first was the lady who lived above me, who let her small dog pee and crap all over the balcony, meaning we basically couldn't open our back door in the summer because of the stench. She also smoked weed constantly, and asked to borrow money several times. When they moved out, they had to tear up all the carpet and deep clean the whole place. She had no teeth, too, which was weird. Another was a guy who lived a few spots down from us. One night I could hear him fighting with his girlfriend through my window, so naturally my girlfriend and I were content eavesdropping on it until we heard a loud smack. Immediately I called the police and off he went to jail. When he returned for his stuff, it's my understanding that he got a grade A butt whooping from several of her friends who were there to welcome him home. Freaking Jay lived across from me, and he'd spend all weekend blasting rock music and singing along. This would go on all day and all night. He was a drunk, so while blasting his music, he'd be drinking, and then he'd start coming out into the hallway and screaming at other tenants for perceived wrongs, like not giving him a freaking toonie for something or other. I called the cops on him twice and complained to the landlord at least a dozen times, and absolutely nothing was done about it. Eventually I found a new apartment in another city, and when my landlord tried to tell me I'd have to pay for 2 months instead of the 1 month notice I'd given, I sent him a long email, with my dad's help, about how nothing in the apartment was up to code and he'd ignored my requests for him to deal with Jay. So did he really want to press the issue with me? Turns out he did not. House across the street raided by SWAT D. Man was taken. Woman left behind. She now has an axe to grind with any and everyone on the street, and her kids are a bunch of little shoots too. My neighbor across the road at the moment is this typical disgusting obese white trash Australian single mum. All day long she screams at her kids in this high-pitched voice similar to a banshee, telling them they are freaking stupid little shoots. And speaking of the kids, they recently got a motorbike that she lets them race up and down the street all day and literally all night. I have heard them absolutely charging down the road on this thing at 11 at night. She's so lazy she drives across the road to her parents' house, which, lucky for me, is right next to my freaking house, so I have to listen to her voice through the paper thin walls of the duplex we share. She lets her kids have parties, so there's always drunk 15-year-olds playing crap music and being little C till God knows when. I'm moving in 2 weeks simply because I can't stand to hear her rank voice and watch her plod around her garden like a fat gnome. Watch her plod around her garden like a fat gnome. That is pure freaking poetry, right there. I've only had 2 apartments in my life. First apartment was when I was 18. Lived in a Section 8 apartment building. Neighbor had some sort of mental disability and his wife was completely blind. They would constantly file noise complaints and bang on the walls. My roommate and I were never even that loud. We would watch TV at a reasonable level, and if we started laughing, bang bang bang, dude would scoff at us from his balcony when we were walking to and from the apartment, and call us names. He filed his 3rd noise complaint when we had a couple friends over for Thanksgiving. Cops came to the door and were like, sorry to bother you. On that 3rd one we got evicted, but we didn't fight it because our lease was almost over anyway. Second apartment, I'm 24. Neighbors above me are loud as crap. I mean raging parties until 3-4 in the morning. Beer pong, loud bass music. Asked them many times to keep the noise down, but the dude always gets in my face saying he has a right to do what he wants in his own house. Threw tons of cigarettes off his balcony and blamed it in my girlfriend and I. They finally moved out, but I will never live in an apartment again. Pet hoarder next door. Unkept yard. Monstrous amount of fesses kept in a garden shed on the edge of their property, amazingly right beside our deck. We always wondered what was going on over there. Then a flyer shows up in our mailbox. Lost male iguana. Aggressive and will bite. Do not approach. Please add a number. Thuffuck.com. A few days later, animal control arrives with tucks and vans. They get into this house and pull out hundreds of animals. Exotic birds, lizards, cats, dogs. It was insane. All were sick or injured. She had specific rooms for them, like a blind animal room or pregnant animal room. No word on that aggressive male iguana might still be creeping around that neighborhood, aggressively biting children perhaps. We had a noisy neighbor for a while. The guy liked having parties. Once or twice a week we could handle, but he started having them more often. Then one week he decided to have loud parties every night, which wouldn't have been much of an issue, but he liked having them in his bedroom and kept his music blasting and his friends making a racket until 6/7 am. I couldn't sleep through his crap, and for a week straight I had no real sleep apart from that hour lull between 7 and 8 am. I was getting in trouble at work for being exhausted when it wasn't my fault. After a few days of this and getting nowhere with him, we wrote a letter and posted it through his door just before the time his mum gets home. Turns out it all went quiet at 7 because that's the time she got home. She found the note on the floor and read it. I was happy to be woken up by her screaming at him. If he had been smart and kept his parties downstairs, everything would have been fine, and we even stated it in the letter we sent them. Parties didn't happen very often after that, and he moved out a few years ago. They called the police on me because I was watching television muted with closed captioning with the windows closed and the blinds shut in my own home at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. When we had moved in, my roommate brought the neighbor a plate of cookies and all of our phone numbers and names, and said to always feel free to call us any time of day and we'd do what she needed. Our neighbor said, "No, we'll call the police instead," and boy, did she ever. We actually started throwing parties because the cops were going to come anyways. I used to live next to two lesbians. One night, one of them came by lamenting her lost lover. She ended up screaming for her and breaking her window with her fist. I had to call the cops and they came to arrest her. She then claimed she had PTSD and ran away, only to be tased and caught seconds later. The two of them had a few more screaming matches before finally moving out. When I was a kid, we lived next door to an awesome dude and his wife. One day, they moved out due to losing the house to the bank. Next thing we know, a skeezy trucker. I know not all truckers are bad. I was one who would routinely fight with his wife on the front yard. They built a fence all the way around the property immediately. Fast forward a few years of antics and shenanigans by these people. We get a knock on the door. My father was arrested for destruction of private property because they said we hit their fence with stuff and broke it. Now this is where the story gets good. In court, they presented blatant pictures of a completely different fence as evidence. My father had pictures of their fence, and the judge sent the sheriff out to take his own pictures. They were found in contempt of court for cussing the judge and falsifying evidence, and got arrested on the spot for threatening a judge. Dad immediately sold the house and we moved out, but he got the last laugh as he sold the house to the bailiff of the court they were in. So, now his next door neighbor is the man who arrested him. He died of an overdose shortly thereafter, and they lost the house to the bank after he was gone. Neighbors from heck. TLDR. Neighbor falsified evidence in court. Bailiff bought our house next door to him and he OD'd. This guy I used to live next to got a divorce and his ex-wife moved out. I think she left him for another guy. About 6 months before I moved in, he got involved with M&H, and he started letting girls and dealers work out of his house. His property went to crap. There were constantly shady folks around. I kept finding used condoms in the gravel dirt shoulder we had instead of sidewalks. The police started showing up constantly as other neighbors called in the crap they were doing there. After about 2 years of this bulls, the house caught fire and the dude died. Apparently he had a heart attack while smoking M in bed and the pipe set his sheets on fire. The house didn't burn down, but it was gutted and condemned, and things got quiet after that. And then my landlord decided to jack the rent beyond what I could pay. I'm 100% she evicted me illegally, but I didn't have the money for a lawyer to fight it. This very OCD lady who came out every morning to pick up the fallen leaves and cleaned her garden. It was her compulsion in a sense. Anyways, she ended up calling child services on another neighbor and her son. They ended up just dumping all leaves and garden waste on her garden and started a war between them. TLDR. A garden neat freak of a neighbor called child services on another. Drinking beer out on the front porch during a Saturday evening. Called the police. We were all of age, so the police said to keep it down. This happened multiple times. The cops stopped asking for IDs. Their dog would be left off leash in the front yard. When completing our runs, the dog would charge around the corner and bite one of us. They said we should know better. Complained when people would park near their house. Threatened to tow multiple cars. I don't drive much because I bike most places, but this frickin' dude next door called the cops the first day I moved in because my car is too loud. The cops showed up and were total car guys. Ended up sitting in the driveway revving my car up because the cops thought my 060 was the crap, which it is. Waiting for the other guy to show up saying you're the neighbor from heck. One of my friend's neighbors are absolutely bat crap crazy and a racist. White supremacist. My friends are Muslim and Pakistani, so their neighbors are always looking for excuses for calling the police on them. One of the most memorable stories was when their eldest son, who was 14 at the time, broke his leg at school and could not walk. His dad was on a business trip, so only his mother had to bring him home from the and help him in. Given that he was over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds, this was much harder than it seemed for his barely 5 feet 5 inches mother. To make it easier to help him in, she parked the car on the lawn right in front of the door so she wouldn't have to drag him across the sidewalk. All of this seemed too shady for the neighbors, and instead of using their eyes or just asking, they called the police for suspicious activity. So now the poor mom had to deal with her broken son and the police showing up at her door to investigate. Along with this instance, the neighbors call the police on them whenever they have a party, even though their parties have no music, no drinking, or anything to warrant the police. But every weekend they blast music themselves and rowdy backyard parties. Because of them, my friends are looking to move. Very late here, but just wanted to add, what a bunch of upstairs neighbors used to get drunk and pee off their balcony, jump up and down and listen to classic rock at a really loud volume. My pops was fresh out the pen and didn't want to get into any trouble, so he politely talked to the husband. Things were okay for a while, and then one day the daughters came down and started throwing those little spiky balls that fall off the tree at my sisters and I. Their mom was laughing and encouraging them. My sisters beat the heck out of both of them, and then the mom decided she wanted to fight my sisters. They were like 12 and 15 at the time. Well, my mom is a straight up lunatic when it comes to her family. When my mom got home, she went upstairs and started pounding on the door. The lady wasn't home, so my mom did the only logical thing left to do and snapped her broom. About 15 minutes later, this big bee came bumping her gums and Marjukes was waiting for it. My mom is only 5 feet 2, but she's about that action. Before she could get down the stairs, my mom hit her with a 2-piece and the behemoth yelled for her husband. That was mistake number 3 for them. Her husband raised his fist to my mom, and my mom let go of his wife and started scrapping with him. My mom beat the heck out of him. My dad was walking in from work and sprung into action. He threw my mom off the dude and beat the frick out of him while still holding his coffee mug and jacket. About an hour later, the dude showed up with 2 of his biker buddies. My dad went out and beat the frick out of all of them. That family moved a week later, and my parents were the heroes of our apartment complex. Old oil rules. When my daughter was 5, we rented the top floor of a 2-family house. The owner gave the bottom floor to her sister, recovering substance abuse problems, trouble holding down a job, 2 kids, absentee father. One day my daughter's tricycle went missing. Found her kids on it an hour later. Confronted her about it, and she said my daughter was spoiled and my family didn't deserve to have anything her family didn't have. My husband was on disability recovering from a life-threatening injury, and I was a school teacher. So, not exactly the Kardashians. When the 30-year-old woman began to taunt my daughter and take her belongings, that's when we terminated our lease. My neighbor in my apartment complex always tries to stop and talk to me, usually when I'm running late for work, which isn't awful. The awful thing is I'm pretty sure he looks out the window and waits. He always manages to open the door and come outside as I happen to be walking by, and goes in promptly after I tell him I'm running late for work. Same neighbor came outside at 11:40 one night as I was putting a new window decal on my car, practically climbed in, and insisted on helping me, then proceeded to try to talk to me afterwards. Another time I was backing out of my parking spot, and he was pulling out of his in my blind spot. He honked his horn so obviously I stopped before I hit him. Instead of him pulling forward and leaving like a normal person, he put his car in park and came over and knocked on my driver's side window and asked me if I even looked back before I started backing out. It was really aggressive. He's also jokingly said to me that he's seen me bring a lot of men into my apartment. I really don't like that guy. He's very creepy. Yeah, I got a bad vibe from that guy through your post. Jesus. I've posted it a couple of times before, but basically, one night, she had a loud argument with herself which turned into a loud argument with the neighbors, which turned into a home invasion of the neighbors, which turned into a home invasion for me and dang near getting stabbed. Goddammit, I always get to these threads too late. I moved into a new housing development a few months ago. My backyard has a slight slope to it which leads to a neighbor's house down the hill. I had my car in the back of the driveway washing it one day when I noticed downhill neighbor lady taking pictures of me and my GF with her iPhone through her window. I thought this was strange, so after I finished washing the car, I knocked on the door and calmly asked why she felt the need to take our picture, and she launched into a yelling, cursing monologue about how we were psychopathic buttholes who were trying to poison her dogs with car soap. So basically, she thought that 3 ounces of car soap, diluted by 10 gallons of water, then diluted again by rain, would wash down into her yard, settle in her grass, and then somehow be toxic enough to prove deadly to her dogs via fumes. I tried to reason with her, but she just kept yelling that soap was made of chemicals and that I was a freaking butthole, etc. She called the police while I was standing there and they literally refused to come. TLDR. Crazy neighbor lady thought that me washing my car was an unconscious assassination attempt on her dogs. I win. I live in a very old house with a very old garage. In fact, the garage was built as one structure, with a dividing wall, and the adjoining section of the garage belongs to the neighbors. Think, one structure, 2 garages, 2 properties. One day, new neighbors move in. Before we get the chance to say hi, we get a letter in the mail from the attorney of our new neighbors. The letter explains that the neighbors will be assuming ownership of our half of the garage. They will be kind enough to pay for maintenance, and we can use it to the extent that they are not. We have our lawyer write them a letter kindly asking them to frick off into the sunset. That's that, or so we thought. One day, Sport next door decides he's going to paint a portion of our half of the garage. We went out the next day and painted back over. The neighbors eventually defaulted on their mortgage and had to move out. Kinda surreal experience. In an apartment, we have a schizophrenic neighbor that has been terrorizing residents for the last decade. From her sibling, the explanation is that she mixes alcohol and hard drugs with her prescription medicine for her condition. She can go months without incident, and then something every few days for months on end. She's a legal carer for her elderly and invalid father, who owns the apartment. It's now at the stage where, upon legal advice, we have to wait until her father dies to forcibly evict her. It's really sad, but she has all the help in the world. Many people have felt sorry for her and tried to assist her, even financially, and she just burns every credit. Police and social services are unwilling to do anything. Some of her exploits. She has successfully applied 2 violence orders on 2 residents, both elderly women, who supposedly ganged up on her in the elevator, physically abusing her. 2 nice little old ladies. They can't come within a certain distance to her, which in a building with 1 elevator is laughable. Regularly lays in wait, following certain residents, soft targets, leaving the building, waits for them to be in a public place, and then verbally attacks them in a public space, trying to humiliate them. Calls people in the building, mainly between 2 AM to 5 AM, accusing them of making suspicious noises, spying on her and conspiring against her, and chain smokes and leaves her front door open, leaving the foyer on her floor in constant stink of nicotine, defacing and destroying anything on the notice board that she doesn't approve of, constructing a bizarre cardboard box for her car in the garage, and refusing to remove it despite an ever-growing rodent family calling it home. The people on her floor are terrified, and even paid for cameras so they would have evidence if she assaulted them. She summarily destroyed multiple cameras, the last time by burning them. The police advised not to replace them after that. because of the fire risk. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.